Hello, this is Catherine Marie, and you are listening to Long COVID Real Talk podcast. Today, I wanted to continue on the mental health track and mention a little bit more about mental health. Last week, we talked about emotion dysregulation and how long COVID can cause so much emotion dysregulation and how it has such a profound effect on the brain. Today, I wanted to talk about suicide. Just suicide all by itself, because these episodes, I don't like them to get too long. It makes me very tired. And I imagine whoever is listening, if you have long COVID, you also don't have tons of energy. And it's easier to listen in bite-sized chunks. So anyway, there have just been so many people on the Facebook groups lately that I've been seeing basically saying that they are passively suicidal, like they would not actually complete suicide. They have no intent to complete suicide. They have no plan to complete suicide, but they just want to give up. They just want to lay in bed, let nature take its course. Just tired of trying, tired of existing, that sort of thing. I think that there are two groups of people that get long COVID. One is like me, where they have mental health diagnoses before they get long COVID, and therefore they already are kind of used to managing them. And even though they got a lot worse, they still know how to manage it. They know where to go. They know the people. They probably already have doctors and therapists set up because they already had diagnoses. And then we have this other group of people that have never had any issues with mental health beyond maybe bereavement or something, or nothing that would warrant a diagnosis from the DSM-5, which is kind of like the diagnosis Bible for mental health. So these people don't have any experience with any of this stuff, and all of a sudden they're emotionally dysregulated. They are suicidal, passively suicidal. Some are not passively suicidal, and that's something else that I wanted to bring up. I think that this is something that is not being talked about enough, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, and I will continue talking about it because I think it's so important. But I know that long COVID causes inflammation, and I know it messes up our brains. It causes memory issues, brain fog, all sorts of stuff. It causes issues with pretty much every system in our body. So why wouldn't it affect our brains, right? But I do think that the inflammation and all of the havoc that it wreaks on our brains, I do think that there is a correlation between that and suicidality. I found this one article, and I was trying to find it again because I wanted to cite it for this episode, but I couldn't find it, of course. But they were basically saying that there were certain neuromodulators that were in the brain that they could identify that if you had, certain things that showed up, that you were more likely to have increased suicidality, something to that effect. So these are things that are not, we don't know a lot about them, just like everything else with long COVID, right? We don't know a lot about it, really. But we know that there are a lot of people that complete suicide because they have long COVID. And some of it is because they may never have dealt with anything like this before, and their whole life has been ruined, essentially. And they're like financially ruined, their health is ruined, their career is ruined, their friends and family, all of their relationships are ruined. It's hard to find something to live for if you feel constantly horrible and you have no support in your life, and there's nothing to look forward to, right? So I was looking up different articles, and I think that it is not uncommon for people with long COVID to have suicidal ideation, even if it's not active with intent and plan. And I think it needs to be monitored. And I think that it doesn't help that long COVID has so many symptoms and no definitive test. It's more a diagnosis of exclusion. There's no test where you just say, oh, okay, you have long COVID. A lot of people go to medical providers who do not know about long COVID, and therefore they feel gaslit by the medical providers, like there's something wrong with them and that they're just being a whiny, complainy person, and that, why are they even there? All of these things accumulate and can cause a sense of despair. I know every time I have a flare up, I feel completely worthless and I feel completely devastated and hopeless every time. And you would think that I would be used to it, but I'm never used to it. It's like the first time every time for me. I don't know why. I don't know if it's like that for everybody when you have flare-ups, but for me, mentally, it's really, really hard every time. So I guess the main point that I wanted to make is that this is a huge problem with long COVID. I think we're going to see it more and more as more and more people get long COVID. There are so many people with long COVID that experience suicidality in some form, and there's just like we need more support for patients with long COVID, for the mental health aspect of it, not because they're crazy, but because long COVID affects their brain. So one study said that they compared individuals who did not have COVID versus those who had had COVID. And the people who had COVID in the past were 46% more likely to have suicidal ideation in the post-acute phase, like after they were sick. And the presence of suicidal ideation increases the risk of suicide. So, and it says in this article that I'm reading, it's called Long COVID and the Risk of Suicide by Sher, Sher. It says that the issue does not receive sufficient attention. The goal of this article is to draw attention of the medical community to the risk of suicide in individuals with long COVID. Suicide risk in long COVID may be underappreciated by both mental health and non-mental health medical professionals. So it's really important to educate medical professionals working with long COVID patients that individuals with long COVID may be suicidal. They need to be screened for suicidality, and if necessary, suicide prevention interventions should be implemented. Well, I think this will continue to keep coming up, but suicide is one of my passions because I had a family member complete suicide when I was in my 20s. Actually, it was during my training when I was getting trained to become a mental health social worker. And that led me to working on the suicide hotline as a social worker. So this is something that is always interested me. And especially if you have never had anything like this before and you have long COVID and all of a sudden you are experiencing all of these mental health things that you've never experienced, I can imagine that that would be pretty dang terrifying. So I'm here to tell you that you're not crazy, that long COVID is affecting your brain. If you are experiencing emotional dysregulation or suicidality, I really, really think that it is prudent to reach out to your primary care doctor or whoever to try to get additional support put in place. If you're in the United States, all you have to do is press 988, and you can talk to the hotline. If you are already very, 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 very depressed and they're really worried that you really may not be safe to be alone, then they may want you to come in. I want to normalize this because I'd rather them overreact a little bit than underreact a little bit, because overreacting a little bit is still going to potentially save your life. And looking back, once, like, the you in the future that will look back and see this time in your life, you will wish that you had gotten help earlier than lived with this for as long as you have. This is my opinion. Anyway, that is all I have for now. I'm getting very tired, so I am going to take a nap. But thank you for listening. Please rate, review, etc., 5-star ratings and all that stuff. And please share with other people that you know with long COVID in your long COVID groups and supports. The reviews and ratings really help the podcast show up in searches for that other people make. So I really, really appreciate it. It would mean a lot to me. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again real soon. Okay? All right. Take good care. Bye.